The Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience Week 2 DraftKings picks and preview. We're talking main slate, only 13 games in that Millionaire Maker slate. No Monday night game, no Sunday night game, no Thursday night game. So for you asking, where's Russell Wilson? Just remember, Sunday only. I want to get that out of the way early. Also, sub to the pod. You can always take me on demand with you audio version. That's always fun. And I want to give a special shout out. Last week on the show, Mike Leone and Drew Dinkmeyer were on. There was a $1 million winner from the Daily Roto side, and Drew ended up a winner over $100K in the Monday night. So shout out to Drew Dinkmeyer and the whole Daily Roto team. You can still use the promo code THEPME and get yourself 10% off that Daily Roto stuff as well. So you might want to go check that out. A lot of success now. Was it because of their product, or was it because of the Pat Mayo Experience bump? We've seen this in the past. So Drew comes on, wins 100K. Raza has had, Raza during golf season, the times that he's been on the show, he's had over 480K cashes. And Al Smiz, when he won the Millionaire Maker, on my show that week. So I want to introduce from DFS On Demand and the Rick Run Good YouTube channel, it is Rick Gehman. Are you pumped to win $1 million this week or what?
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked. I've already spent it actually, so I hope the Pat Mayo bump is real.
It's about as real as anything else. When people talk about narratives, that's a narrative I can get behind.
Yeah, it works out perfectly for me, so you will hear no complaints on this side of the table.
All right, so very occasionally will it translate on to me. It's like one in I think I've done 1,500 shows at this point. 1 out of 1,500 times, it works for me. Otherwise, it's all for the guests. So maybe this is the week it bounces back to me, because I would take that. Also, I do want to let people know that Thursday, you can check out the pick show with myself and Feinberg live Sunday morning. Myself, Gary and Thorne, and Tim Andacus taking your questions 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the DraftKings YouTube channel, available on the podcast feed after the fact if you want to crunch on Sunday morning. All the latest rankings, updates, injuries, and such. The cheat sheet for the show, plus all my rankings up on DKPlaybook.com. And if you hit the description, you can find all the time codes for the show and all the links to all those articles and shows. Plus my Facebook page, facebook.com/thepme, has bonus content, cheat sheets, all that fun stuff. If you want to go over there, follow the page, check that out as well. Finally, if you want to get in the draw for $20 DK, I suggest you give the episode a like. That is step 1. Step 2 is leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section. And then step 3, give me your single favorite value on this slate. The points per dollar best player on the main slate for Sunday on DraftKings. Boom, you're in the draw for $20 DK. I'll announce the winner live on Monday morning show, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time with Jake Seeley, breaking down the waiver wire and recapping the week. You ready to get into this, Rick?
Let's do it.
Was that enough promo for you?
No, not enough. I was hoping for 45 minutes more.
Oh, how about DFS On Demand? Go check it out, right?
There you go. DFS On Demand, at DFS On Demand on Twitter. Let's get into the slate.
All right, running backs, we're starting off with them right away. And hey, once we look at the top, it's no shocker who's going to be at the top when it comes down to it. Alvin Kamara is the most expensive player on the running back side. He is 95. Todd Gurley's 92. Bell would be 9,000, but it looks like he's not going to play. Then you got DJ at 82. Then you drop down to the $7,000 area. Melvin Gordon, Christian McCaffrey. And then it's Leonard Fournette at $6,800. He's sitting out practice on Wednesday. We're still not sure if he's going to play or not. We'll talk about that in a second. Then the 8th highest priced running back of the week, James Conner, $6,700 in the highest projected point total game of the week. Pittsburgh is actually second behind the Rams in terms of highest implied team total here. It's a huge bump up in price from what he was last week at $4,500. I still think that he's like $1,500 or so underpriced.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. This whole James Conner thing, the huge increase in price, but he is playing in an offense that is going to give him the rock maybe 30 times again, right? No other running back had a carry last week. This is the highest total on the slate. Vegas thinks it could be a shootout. So I'm usually scared off when someone increases as much as James Conner did, week to week. But you're right, Pat, this isn't enough. He should be closer to, I probably have him 8,000 would probably be, I think, the right number for me. But this is too cheap. I'll be on him with everybody else.
Do you think that everyone will end up on him here? Because it's a week where you can fit in like some lower end receivers, maybe some cheaper tight ends that people are going to like, pay down at quarterback. That worked again with Ryan Fitzpatrick, at least in terms of winning the Millionaire Maker. Take those cheap stacks, the cheap QBs, and then just pay up for the chalk at the rest of the positions. That's what came through. Like, do you have interest in Kamara and Gurley in this spot? Because I think, for me, I may have more interest in Gurley than Kamara here, but it's going to be tough to get them in because they're so expensive.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many of these guys we can fit into the lineups. Love Gurley, love Kamara. They're kind of splitting hairs a little bit. I lean slightly Gurley as well. Now, Pat, let me ask you this, because I've been on this Kamara, like, regression has to happen at some point. He only had, 17 touches. He scores 46 fantasy points. I've been kind of thinking this doesn't add up, right? But maybe 17 touches for Alvin Kamara is like 25 for anybody else. I don't know how you feel about that. If some of this regression is coming, I might just protect myself and play Gurley, but you got to love his nose for the end zone, and he's just like an unbelievably shifty human highlight reel.
Well, it's just how they use him. So the efficiency will eventually come down, but I don't know, like, is he going to get that many targets per game? Will we now see more rushes? Because actually on the ground, he didn't perform all that well. He didn't need to in terms of fantasy scoring because he did so much through the air. But, I mean, that was always, when we talked about efficiency last year in terms of him, how he's going to come back, like, was he going to average 9 yards a carry? No one's going to end up doing that unless he's the greatest running back of all time. But when he eventually does come back to earth in terms of efficiency, where is his actual baseline? And he might be one of the one or two best running backs for his system in terms of fantasy and all of football. So I wouldn't just completely dodge it saying like, well, he can't do that again. Clearly we know he can do this. He continues to do it. And every time that the Saints are massive favorites, which they are again this week at home against Cleveland, he really does seem to come through. You just lock him in.
Yeah, he's almost, I don't want to say he's like game script proof, but like he kind of is, right? They're big favorites. They can hand him the rock. They throw it to him if they're behind. Like, he can do it all. I think Gurley is safer, right? Because you get that more guaranteed like 20 touches or 20 carries, throw in a handful of targets. He's going to catch 70 or 80% of them. But then if you continue to, like, I think the ownership, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Pat, so you've got James Conner at 6,700, which we both agree really, really good price, still not high enough. And then you've got Kamara, Gurley at the top. What about these guys in the middle? Does that just leave David Johnson, Melvin Gordon, Christian McCaffrey under owned? Like, what happens there?
I don't think that McCaffrey will end up coming in under owned, only because the high usage rate that he got last week, played 86% of the snaps. And he's going up against Atlanta, who are now down two of their fastest members of their defense. Plus, they constantly struggle against pass-catching running backs anyway. I think everything's building towards him. David Johnson is the one that I could see coming in wildly under owned. I mean, he leads the league in red zone targets, so that's something. He didn't catch any of them, but, it's not so bad from that front. I just don't like the matchup. You talk about like some guys are game script independent. He is one of them. In fact, his fantasy value might go up if the Cardinals are actually losing in a game. And by Vegas right now, the Rams have the highest team total on the slate, and they're projected as double-digit favorites, the only double-digit favorites on this entire slate. So you could see the path to like 8 to 10 targets for David Johnson, but I don't know if I like him $1,000 or $1,200 more than Christian McCaffrey, or even $600 more than Melvin Gordon in this spot.
I agree. I think those two guys, Gordon and Johnson, are going to just fall into no man's land. So it's somewhat more likely that one of those guys is on the winning Millie Maker lineup, because you could see David Johnson be, running back one this week at 5% or whatever he ends up being. Christian McCaffrey, I agree, will just now, especially with Greg Olsen out, it's like a three-man show there. It's really Cam, McCaffrey, and then, Funchess, I suppose, is the only other offensive playmaker on that team. So it's going to be really interesting when I start building lineups how the construction is going to go. As a GPP player, I wouldn't mind getting some overweight exposure on David Johnson, but I think we're pretty confident where the vast majority of the ownership is going to lie at the top here.
But, I mean, would ownership scare you off of Conner this week? Because it's not going to scare me off. I don't care if he becomes super chalky. James Conner is probably where I'm going to start a lot of my teams. Now, it depends on if I end up stacking the Steelers. Do I really want to go Ben, Conner, Brown? Now, I don't know if I'm eating my own tail on that one because I would expect Connor to get rushing touchdowns, and if he gets rushing touchdowns, those are fewer touchdowns for Ben to throw. So I might make a few independent lineups where, and we've seen people have a lot of success with this before, doing the quarterback, running back stack, and we did see Connor get involved in the passing game last week. I just feel like the majority of his scores, if he's going to end up in the end zone, will be on the ground, not through the air. So I think I would rather do like a Ben, Brown, even Jesse James if Vance McDonald doesn't play, put Juju into that spot, or just play Connor by himself and hope you get like 3 touchdowns out of him and they don't pass for any.
Yeah, there's only a few running backs I'd pair with quarterbacks. Connor, I think, is fine. Christian McCaffrey and Cam Newton is probably the best case scenario. Maybe Kamara and Drew Brees in certain situations.
Yeah, if Kamara and Drew Brees weren't so expensive, I mean, Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara are the two like prototypical ones that you want to go for.
Yeah, and then as far as, am I scared off about James Conner's ownership? I think in this situation you can't be, because you're only going to get one chance at this, right? James Conner's probably, like, no matter really what he does, as long as he gets 20, 25 carries and has a decent game, this price is going up. So you're only going to get one chance at this. If Le'Veon Bell comes back next week or the week after, like, James Conner might not exist for DFS purposes in 2 or 3 weeks. So I don't think that you can use this as an opportunity to fade it, because you might never get an opportunity to play it.
Okay, so above that on the list with James Conner, is there anyone else you would just go to first? Like, are you going to be a Melvin Gordon, David Johnson guy, or are you going to wait for ownership projections to come out to see which one's lower, and that might put you on them? But do you think that any of those guys are like stone cold locks for your lineup? Because when we start talking about pricing, like, Kamara's a bit much, Gurley's a bit much. Like, if you wanted to start with James Conner and even just drop down $100 and take Dalvin Cook in a really nice spot, that might be the move.
Yeah, I really love both of those guys, Connor and Dalvin Cook. So I imagine as I start building this, I will gravitate there and start my lineups with one of those 2 running backs. But in a vacuum, I really like David Johnson. If I can fit him into as many lineups as I can, especially GPP type lineups, I'm going to opt to do that. So if I'm in a 20 max, I like to have a really tight exposure. I like to go very overweight on guys. So he would make an appearance in quite a few of those lineups, but I don't know yet, Pat, because I'm going to have to find some options. There's some cheap tight end options that I'm sure we'll talk about. It makes the roster construction a lot more difficult. If you'd be able to plug and play a lot safer, higher upside, and make an all-around better team if you started down at Connor and Cook.
Okay, so if we talk about the rest of the $6,000 area, like I mentioned, it goes Connor, it goes Dalvin Cook, and then you have Jay Ajayi and Kareem Hunt. Ajayi needs to score touchdowns in order to return this value. So I guess as a contrarian play, I kind of get it. It's not for me, though. I would just much rather, I don't know if I'm going to use a ton of Kareem Hunt either, but I feel like he's just a better play at that price point when we start looking at things like market share in the backfield, snap share. Not to say the Giants can't go up from 40% what it was last week, but what are we really thinking is you're a Philly guy. What's like the max? What's a maximum amount of snaps you can see Ajayi playing in one game? I would say it's 60%. Like, that's going to be his ceiling for that. And that means he needs to get all the goal line touches. He's not doing much in the receiving game, whereas all the other guys that we've talked about are basically locked into 70% plus.
I agree with you. And obviously I probably watch more of the Eagles than any other team. And it's just not a great situation for fantasy. I like it for the NFL, right? Just run guys in and out of there, roll with the hot hand. Cool, Doug Peterson. I love it. But for fantasy purposes, I think you're right, Pat. Like, everything has to go right for Jay Ajayi to hit a ceiling or to return significant value. I think he's much riskier than a lot of these other guys, because you're right. He's just like, there's no real upside here, right? Everyone's kind of locked into their role. Darren Sproles can be out there catching passes. And yeah, like, he has to fall into the end zone twice. And if you're banking on a guy to fall into the end zone twice, it's probably not a good play. And
even if he does that, if we look right below him at Kareem Hunt might double his touches, find the end zone twice, and score twice as many points.
Yeah, it's there. Unfortunately, I'm a Philly guy. I love this for an NFL situation, but you're right. I will have little exposure to Philly running backs this season just because of the way. I mean, barring some injury somewhere, this isn't a great situation to target.
So we see more running backs in this $5,000 range this week as opposed to week one when the pricing came out super early. It's now been adjusted a little bit. Devonta Freeman is right on that $6,000 number. We're still not certain he's going to play. He probably is with the extended time off. He is $6,000. Thompson, Drake, Shady, Ingram, who's suspended, so he's not in. TJ Yeldon, we'll talk about him here. Adrian Peterson, Lamar Miller, Tevin Coleman, Derrick Henry, Jamal Williams, Bilal Powell, Marshawn Lynch, Dion Lewis, all at $5,000. Like, it's a really mismatch of guys that we kind of like, some guys that we don't like. Like, is there any way that you could play Freeman at $6,000 knowing he's in a split and dealing with a bad knee?
No, there's a lot of guys to like in this range. There's a lot of guys to hate in this range. Freeman is just, you're right. It's already a split. He's got that little Q next to his name, right? So we know that, or we don't know what's going to happen come Sunday. So at this point, I don't know how you could feel comfortable when for $100 cheaper, Chris Thompson sits there. And I saw this passing around a little bit, but the ADOT for Alex Smith, the average depth of target for Alex Smith last week was like 3 yards, which is like half of his career average of what it already is, like 7.5 yards, which is a tiny number. If they're just going to dump it off to Chris Thompson in full point PPR situations, I wouldn't want to play him on sites where it's not a full point PPR, but the opportunity for you to capture that guy who's playing a larger role in the offense than maybe even I suspected, for $100 cheaper than Freeman, I can't get myself to pay for Freeman.
So paying for Freeman is probably not something that you want to do, but Thompson kind of worries me in the same sense as we talked about Ajayi a little bit, because he is in a split. He's not the goal line back Adrian Peterson is, who's even cheaper, coming off a really big game, and people are all fired up about that. Now going up against Indy at home as a favorite. Game script you would think would play into his favor here to at least see more snaps, more touches, but we saw this last season with Adrian Peterson. He would have one of these huge volume games, do really, really well, and then he would be a disaster for like 3 weeks in a row. Do you believe in Adrian Peterson in this spot? Because I think a lot of people are going to go back to him.
I believe in Adrian Peterson in basically this spot alone, and I think this is going to fall off a cliff very, very quickly. You're absolutely right, Pat. Very dependent on game script, needs the volume. I think you've got about one more week of that. And then when the schedule starts to turn and, this guy who's, I don't know how old he is at this point, starts to wear down, I think it's going to fall off a cliff for Adrian Peterson. So he's got about one more week for me. I think this is it. What are they? A 5.5 point favorite at home against Indy. This is basically it. I will be on a week by week basis for Adrian Peterson, but I'm not optimistic, but I am this week.
All right. So who's the better play? Let's say Fournette sits this week. Is Yeldon a better play against the Patriots, or is Peterson against the Colts? I think you can make an argument for both, but I think the floor for Yeldon in that situation would be better just because of his involvement in the passing game.
I probably agree with that. I would have leaned Yeldon. That New England rush defense did not look good last week. We've seen Yeldon be somewhat productive in the past, right? When he's had to fill in before. So this is I think that Yeldon gives you a better combination of being game script independent, right? You don't need the game to go exactly as scripted for Yeldon as we would for Adrian Peterson. So yeah, I think that's a safe bet. And obviously all this assumes, Leonard Fournette doesn't suit up. Yeah.
If Leonard Fournette suits up, you just don't use either one of them, because then you're going to have no idea. Because Fournette's going to do that thing where it's like, oh, Leonard Fournette's playing great. And he ends up like playing 4 snaps. And he's like, oh, my hamstring hurts again. It's like, oh, great. And then for whatever reason, Corey Grant's in the game. And you're like, this is just a disaster. So if Fournette plays complete stay away, I will play Yeldon for sure. I would even play him in cash if need be, unless you want to dip to someone lower. But there's other guys in this $5,000 area too that could see over 70% of their snaps. We saw 2 of them last week. Dion Lewis and Kenyon Drake are 2 of them. And they walk into matchups that are not great, but they're not porous either. So, do you have more faith in a Lewis or Drake? Because it would be Drake for me, but I still don't know if I want to take him against the Jets, only because there just might be better options around here. Like Shady's right there as well, and I'm just throwing week 1 out for that.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point because there's probably a lot of stuff from week one that we might just want to throw out, like that Tennessee Miami game. The Saints defense is probably not as bad as they look. Like there's a lot of stuff that you can probably look at week one and be like, all right, we're gonna get back to normal here. But to get back to it, I mean, I think Drake is interesting. I tend to lean when I get down here. I'm looking for significant upside. Usually, you find that with pass catchers because of the PPR format. So I lean towards someone like Dion Lewis. I guess it's a little bit dependent on who's starting at quarterback. Blaine Gabbert, if he starts, they're going to be behind like this entire game. So you would assume that Dion Lewis is going to be catching a lot of passes. He's going to be racking up those PPR points. So I might want to wait to see who's actually going to play this week for Tennessee. But as of right now, I still think Dion Lewis is the guy.
Last two here. If Freeman sits, would you go to Coleman against a stiff Panthers run defense? Because I would think about it, but I still think there are better options in this area.
Yeah, I would not. I'd even go down to someone like Carlos Hyde, right? I mean, what was that? You don't like Carlos Hyde?
No, I was just I didn't even really think of Carl like that. That seems like, I know he played a ton of snaps last week, but that game was Pittsburgh only got up by 14 very momentarily. Then the game got close again. If the Saints get up big in this game, doesn't this seem like a situation where he could be written out and there's just a lot of Duke Johnson?
Yes, I think we're going to find out how good this Saints defense is, right? If it's anything close to what we saw last week, Carlos Hyde can be involved in a big way. If it is what we kind of expected, 2 weeks ago, where they're more stout, yeah, this could be a Duke Johnson type game. So I'm willing to move a couple of chips for $4,500, open up a lot of that flexibility at other positions to grab Carlos Hyde, or he's not 40, he's 4,900 this week, excuse me, to open up some possibilities at other positions. And maybe if it's 40% that Saints D really is as bad as they were last week, there's going to be plenty of fantasy points for him.
Well, the last one at $5,400 is Lamar Miller, who just kept pounding against the Patriots. Actually performed quite well. Alfred Blue stole his touchdown because Alfred Blue was a jerk, but it was still Lamar Miller on the field most of the time. And it might just, and we talk about throwing week one out, there's probably no game that's less indicative of how teams are going to perform in that Miami-Tennessee game with its 7-hour runtime and multiple lightning breaks. But both Drake and Gore were able to gash them on the ground. If Miller's the only one getting work on the ground outside of Deshaun Watson here, why aren't people turning to Miller at all?
Probably because he's burned everybody for like 5 straight years, Pat. I mean, he's killed everybody. I agree with you though. One of only 4 guys to get 20 carries last week. I agree. I was watching the highlights of this and I thought he looks pretty good. And it's one of those situations where, he falls two yards short of the 100-yard rushing bonus. He doesn't find the end zone, so it kind of keeps him hidden in here. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but when guys don't go off, when they get a ton of usage and don't find the end zone 2 times, and they're not in the winning Millie Maker lineup, they're basically overlooked. A lot of guys will chase points and go get someone like I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick's ownership is going to be this week, but I guarantee you it's more than it was last week. So they kind of chase those points, and the fact that if you can find production and you can find usage for someone who did not find the end zone, those are usually the guys that I'm looking to snatch.
All right, from this sub $5,000 level, you already mentioned Carlos Hyde, but who are some of the other guys that immediately pop off to you as pretty good plays? Because I see Rex Burkhead with a $100 increase in the low $4,000 area. Rex Burkhead, I played him last week. It didn't work out, obviously, but he was dominating all of the touches on the ground, and that was even before Jeremy Hill hurt his knee and went out for the season. Sony Michel's likely to be back, but I don't know how big of a role he's going to play in his first game as a Patriot. And Rex was 2 plays away, a Brady overthrow away from having a gigantic game. And I know it's a tough defense against Jacksonville, especially on the ground. Last season, it was Dion Lewis who was used a lot here. It wasn't just dump-off fest to James White. So if Burkhead's going to be the guy that's on the field the most, which we did see, and his usage, especially touches per snap, was way up for him, that if he can be the one that involves himself in the pass-catching game here against the Jags, I think for his price point, it's pretty good.
I agree with you. There's especially the two play away thing, right? I've got a couple of guys who are 1 or 2 plays away from being the absolute chalk of the week, which is probably what Burkhead was, right? It's one of these situations where I don't want to say the New England Patriot, like I don't care what the matchup is. Obviously, I care what the matchup is, but they can find ways to expose defenses. They can find ways to, scheme up against you where like there's no defense to it, right? So Rex Burkhead, for someone who's going to be as involved in the offense for such a legitimate, obviously high octane offense like New England can be for $4,400. And like, look at his peers, like just the peers around here. Like, okay, cool. I like Austin Eckler, but like, there's no one else down here. I guess there's like one or two more guys, but there's really no one else I'd be super stoked about playing. And Rex Burkhead kind of leads my, sub 5K guys.
So let's talk about the rest of the guys that you might consider playing here. Like the Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman thing really threw a wrench. It's going to keep ownership probably off of Freeman more than Lindsay because people get hyped to play Lindsay. But are you back on a Royce Freeman play here at a very cheap price?
I actually like Royce Freeman. I liked him last week. I thought he looked good. It's just unfortunate that Lindsay kind of broke that touchdown and took the vibes from him. I agree. It feels like the industry is moving away from Royce Freeman after one game. If we're willing to throw out, things from week one in some areas, but not in others, I think that's pretty silly. So I thought he looked good. I'm still willing to buy. He might be at the better half of this timeshare, but we don't really know. I guess we have to see how this is going to shake out. And again, like there's really no other options that I'm more comfortable with. And by the way, not sure if you saw the game. Oakland probably stinks.
Yeah, Oakland's not great, but yeah, then you have to start worrying that, hey, maybe Derek Carr just throws pick sixes on every pass. You're like, oh man, the other team's not even going to get to play offense in this spot. So that's always a concern as it pertains to Oakland, at least this season. The other guys that I found, I just think from a pass catching perspective, Nyheim Hines, especially with the Colts being underdogs in the situation, every time he was on the field, they threw to him. Him and Rocket Richard are the two guys that if they're trailing in these games, that it just seems like they're going to pile up PPR points. Probably not great GPP plays because they need to be behind, and if they score, then they're just going to get replaced in the game. So I'm not really quite sure how to use them because the snap share is probably not going to be there. But if they can break a big one, you're getting a super cheap price. Out of all these guys, I mean, Peyton Barber is one who is still the lead back, played over 70% of the snaps, wasn't involved in the passing game at all, but the Bucs didn't really have to pass to their running backs that much. They were beating the Saints most of the time. Probably not going to be the same script against the Eagles, but if they can keep that game close, you might see a lot of Peyton Barber. But the big one to me that stands out, $3,600, Alfred Morris is just sitting right there. I know he fumbled, but he was getting all the red zone and goal line work for the 49ers against the Vikings. Now they get the Lions, who were just beat up on the ground by Powell and Crowell, that I'm playing him. Like, the touchdown upside that he has for $3,600, and I know that he's going to get like at least 15 touches, probably no receptions, but still, that's a very cheap price for that high a touchdown upside. It's basically what you're doing with Jay Ajayi, except you're paying half the price.
Yeah, that is the perfect analogy there. As far as Hines go, it's interesting because some of these guys, they can actually be their own worst enemy. And if he does well and he scores a couple touchdowns and this game, gets close, you're right, Pat, he comes out. So it's like you're banking on them always being like 7 to 10 points down throughout the entirety of the game, which is a little bit concerning because you need like the perfect game scripts to come into play for these guys. But I see what you're saying. I think he's a great pass catcher. If you want to take on that risk, I couldn't blame you for it. Concerns around Peyton Barber, you nailed it. 19 rushes last week, but it's not going to be the same against Philly this week. They're a much better defense and had time to prepare. But Alfred Morris is the guy with the star next to my name. I thought he looked better than Matt Breida. Matt Breida, came into that game when they needed a bit of instant offense and catch the ball. But we talk week over week about how valuable red zone carries are, how valuable goal line carries are. Alfred Morris is the guy. And $3,600 is what? The same price as Amir Abdullah. That's insane. I don't know where this pricing came from, but you're right. I think you can plug and play Alfred Morris into a lot of different formats. I don't think you're required to just play him in cash games. I don't think you're required to just play him in GPPs because he is so low. It's going to open up a lot of roster flexibility for you this week.
So let's say you wanted to play James Conner and Dalvin Cook, two of the guys that we like up there, especially James Conner, and then you put Alfred Morris into your flex. You still have over $5,500 per player left after that if that's the build you wanted to go to. Plus that $3,600 price tag also opens up Kamara, Gurley, David Johnson, those top guys as well, if you wanted to go into that middle tier area and take like a Lamar Miller, for example, someone like that you could kind of work it out to all be the same either way. Plus, I always use Alfred Morris. I guess always just use a late afternoon guy in your flex spot so you can take advantage of the late swap. I think that's someone that people, even in your like season-long leagues, people always forget to do this, that if you do need to make a change or someone gets hurt or you just see an ultimate value open up, you want to have that ability to take a player out of your flex spot and have as many opportunities as possible, that you just don't need to fill it with a running back. You can fill it with a receiver or a tight end. It just goes a long way. Is that something that you utilize on a weekly basis?
I do. And I just started getting into this probably like the last half of last year. Honestly, I was pretty guilty of just setting my lineup, sitting down in front of red zone, cracking open some cold ones and watching 8 or 9 hours of football and never checking. But really, if you go and look at your lineups, the ones that are even, borderline cashing, and you go and you open up your flex plays and like you would have known you were like drawing dead. Right? 4 hours into Sunday, you know how your lineups are looking. If you have a couple guys early who have underperformed, you can swap for guys that you know are not going to be popular. Now, you might need a 2 or 3% guy to score a couple touchdowns, but you were basically dead anyway. So I've started to do this, and it's certainly rare where you go from you're not going from cashing to winning this thing, but you're going from not cashing to cashing, which if you're playing a lot of volume, if you're playing week after week, like obviously a massive difference for you to just take on to pay a little bit of attention. Really, that's all it is. You can go in, you can make your swaps, and it takes a couple minutes, and you're back in play. I think too many lineups are drawing dead halfway through Sunday, and most people don't even realize it.
All right, let's switch to receiver, and at the very top, we got Antonio Brown, no longer playing in semi-monsoon type conditions, one of the highest projected point totals of the week. He's very expensive, like Antonio Brown is. Even in a bad game, he still scored a touchdown. So he comes at 8,800. Michael Thomas is at 86, Julio Jones 84, and DeAndre Hopkins at $8,000. Of those top 4 guys, which one interests you the most? Because it's Brown for me, then it's Hopkins. I'm a bit worried that Denzel Ward might be good and actually slow down Michael Thomas. I don't think he's going to end up with like 18 targets again, or double digit. He could end up with double digit receptions because that's what he does. But it just seems like a tougher spot here, especially if they jump out to an early lead.
Yeah, so I'm not as worried about Michael Thomas as you might be. He was one of the safest. He was actually the safest of the top 25 wide receivers last year. I know they've got some different pieces, but he's such an integral part of that offense that I'm not too worried about it. My top 2 wide receivers are I agree with you, Brown number 1, and then I'm going for Julio. So we'll start with Antonio Brown, who, yeah, you mentioned he's $8,800. He's expensive, but he's only been under $9,000 going back to last year, twice in the last 10 weeks. It doesn't happen often when you get, a sub 9K Antonio Brown, especially, playing at home in the highest total of the game, as you mentioned. And he was just ho-hum, 9 catches, 93 yards, and a touch. It was the quietest 24 DraftKings points game. I didn't even remember it happening. And it happened. So you get Big Ben at home. I think Antonio Brown's pretty clearly the number 1 wide receiver on the slate. But Julio Jones, is another guy. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. He's basically the only wide receiver in the top 10 last week that did not score a touchdown. He's touchdown independent. And he better be, because he continues to fall down inside the 5-yard line 3 times a game. And then they take him out and run it up the middle 4 times and, turn it over. But it's one of these situations where he's got so many targets, so many receptions, and so many yards that if he does find the end zone, it's almost gravy at this point. I still think he has not tapped into his ceiling based on the other metrics that we have on. I think there's room for him to get higher.
Well, I don't want to say that I don't like Michael Thomas. I don't like him compared to the other 4 guys that were up here. If I'm going to have to leave one out of my lineups, he's the guy that I'm leaving out. So I think that Hopkins will come in wildly under-owned, though. We just saw Kenny Stills light up the Titans defense. You don't think DeAndre Hopkins can do that?
Oh, Kenny Stills is not as good as DeAndre Hopkins? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I'm throwing that out there as a take.
Well, give it a few. We'll the sample size, one game. I think Kenny Stills is the best wide receiver in football.
Well, it's funny because we do this thing. We brought it back last week or on yesterday's show, the ranking show, which I advise everyone to go check out. We called it like the worst Twitter question in the world. It's just like a completely ridiculous question. Like the question was, do I drop Deshaun Watson for Ryan Fitzpatrick? That was the question. Now, the crazy thing about football is where we talk about it in sort of like a mocking tone because that's fun. But when you ask any ridiculous football question, it might not be wrong like 5 weeks from now when someone gets hurt.
Yeah, please don't watch this video after Tuesday because we're gonna look really silly. But no, you're right. Things change so often in the NFL that we can dig up some of those old tweets and be like, hey, like I wasn't that dumb. But right now, that's pretty dumb.
$7,000 range for wide receivers. Keenan Allen is the most expensive of that grouping. Then it's Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Adam Thielen. Then into the sixes, you got Stefon Diggs and Devontae Adams there at the very top of the $6,000 area. Is it just plug and play Tyreek Hill, hope for the best, or is this a week to get on the fade train with him now that everyone in the world is going to be on him?
Yeah, I'd probably lean more towards playing him than fading him, just because I don't really love anybody else. I mean, Keenan Allen's fine, but I certainly don't expect Mike Evans to have the same type of repeat performance or anything close to it. Then you're guessing on which of the Minnesota wide receivers is going to have a good game. And I guess DraftKings is what they're just going to price them the same and put them in the same spot every week and have us flip coins over it. So I think Tyreek becomes the guy because I don't really like the other options, even going all the way down to, like Amari Cooper. There's nothing really that perks my ears up. So yeah, I'm just going to bank on Tyreek Hill to have another game like he did last week.
I'm with you. I think the two plays in this area, the Keenan Allen one's tough because if the Chargers get up by too much, is just become a run fest. It's almost the same concern that I have with Melvin Gordon. I think they'll keep Melvin Gordon in, and maybe this game's a lot closer than I would project it out to be because the week 2, the Bills as huge home underdogs have like a weird history of winning these games. I remember Arizona was in there. Is like everyone thought that Arizona was going to be like a 15-point favorite in Buffalo in week 2, and they were only like 3.5-point favorites. And I was like, that's weird. Then everyone bet Arizona, and Buffalo won outright. So it's just a weird spot to go. Bills, the Ralph home opener. I mean, that's like a sacred holiday in Buffalo. I'm still thinking the Chargers, obviously, but it's a game where if they get up by too much, you can see Eckler in the game for Melvin Gordon, and I might just want to target like the Mike Williams of the world instead of paying up for Keenan Allen in this situation. So I think for me, it's Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans. And I think it's Tyreek Hill because I like it more than Mike Evans.
Yeah, and it's you know what? We're going to learn a lot about the Bills this week. This is one of those situations where if they have any guts at all, like they've got to compete in this game. You can't go and get absolutely smashed by the Ravens in week 1 and then go to your home opener and, get beat up bad again. So we're going to find out if they have any courage in this team. So I don't mind being a little cautious about that game script, but you're right, Pat. I guess, you continue to go down. You've got Devontae Adams and Golden Tate down there. It starts to get really ugly in that, high 6s, mid 7s on which one of these guys you feel comfortable rostering. Yeah,
I don't really love any of these guys. So even below Devontae Adams, you have like T.Y. Hilton and Amari Cooper, Golden Tate, Juju, who is just going to be thrown in stacks because of the Pittsburgh stack. Landry, Marv, Sanders, Aguilar, Brendan Cooks, Larry Fitzgerald, Alshon Jeffrey's not playing, so you probably shouldn't play him. Woods, Gordon, Kenny Stills, Demaryius Thomas. Like value-wise, of all the guys that I just mentioned, Demaryius Thomas is probably the best play.
Yeah, it's probably not wrong either.
Like looking at all these splits, like Jarvis Landry could just be a target magnet again, especially in a very positive game script, which we expect, but maybe Josh Gordon does more this week, or maybe Lattimore takes out Landry and then it's Josh Gordon time. It's hard to know. The Lions receivers, I'm just throwing up my hands. Kenny Golladay is probably the one you want to play because he's the cheapest. That would be the way that you'd want to play it. But like Aguilar was the king of the target share last week. It was him and Ertz, and that was basically it in that Philly offense. And now they're playing Tampa, who sucks on defense. And then you have the two Denver guys. Like, I like Sanders more than I like Thomas, but you're getting a huge break to take Thomas.
Yeah, I agree. The Denver guys remind me a lot of the Minnesota guys, where we're just playing this little guessing game each week and flipping coins. I think Demaryius Thomas is a great play, but also like I'm willing to go back to Kenny Stills. Like all joking aside about him being like the best wide receiver in football, he's basically the only guy there. So I don't know what this is going to shake out to be, 15 or 16 weeks from now and what his target share is going to be. But I assume it's going to be pretty high because he's got no one to compete with. Playing in New York against the Jets, I mean, I'll fire up Kenny Stills again.
I can see that. Do you have any preference to the Rams receivers? Because I just have no clue. I think that the move is if you're going to play, because they're such big favorites, they're projected to score the most points this week, that the way to play it might be play Goff and Gurley and just play Gurley to get all the Gurley points, hope they connect together, and then just since we don't know which receiver is going to have the big day, that just play Goff and get all the touchdowns along with it.
Yeah, I think the Rams situation is so difficult, but I think you can get whatever you want out of the situation. So if you want to get like what you think is like a PPR type guy and go get Cooks and see if he can rack up a bunch of targets, like I don't think he's still that guy anymore, but if you want it, you can go get it. Cooper Kupp, I think I was actually really impressed last week. I'm mostly down on Cooper Kupp, but watching him go out there, he ran really efficient routes. I actually was pretty impressed with him. I think he's a little bit of a safer play, but Robert Woods is the guy with all the average depth of target, right? Like he's like your deep ball guy. So you can almost use him as kind of like a GPP flyer. So I hate the situation in general, but I think if you can find specific, like they're not all the same. You can go get whichever guy you want for the format that you're playing in.
Well, the problem with Cooks is every one of his deep targets gets wiped out by pass interference.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And they should give you fantasy points for that at some point. Well, I'm going to start my own site. And
we talked about this on yesterday's show that people are going to start complaining about this. They're like, no, you should get at least like 0.25 points for every for all the yardage that you didn't get from pass interference. Sometimes fantasy fucks you. That's what happens.
Or your guy breaks off a long run and it comes back for holding. Like, what? Come on. He was there. He scored a touchdown. It didn't impact it at all. Like, give me some points, guys.
Yeah, so there is variance. That's why people like fantasy football, I think, that there is that element to it, that it triggers you. You go from the highs to the lows. That's why people are into it. So the rest of the guys in this, like, $5,000 range, like $5,600 Demaryius Thomas, I do like a lot. $5,100 Corey Davis, even if Blaine Gabbert starts. I know that's not optimal. Maybe Marcus Mariota playing quarterback for them is also suboptimal. But 13 targets last week, no Delaney Walker now. I might just take a shot on that volume.
I agree. He was my highlighted guy as well. He was not nearly as efficient with Blaine Gabbert, but spoiler alert, like no wide receiver in the history of football is as more efficient with Blaine Gabbert. So I'd prefer if Mariota plays. I would have considered avoiding this situation, but you're right. With Delaney Walker down, it's the Corey Davis show. He's going to have to eat up these targets one way or another. And I think 13 targets was like fourth or fifth highest in the league last week, and all those other guys were, primetime players. So you're down in the 5,000s with a guy who is, most certainly going to see double-digit targets and then some. I'm not sure how you can pass that up. I agree with you, but I'd prefer it if Mariota's the guy throwing him the ball.
Sub $5,000 area. Kenny Golladay is right there, as is Quincy Enunwa. Little Quincy with a big market share, as we saw on Monday night. Of those two guys who played on Monday night, which one do you have more confidence in?
Galladay. I think he just looks the best. The Lions are going to throw enough to possibly sustain three wide receivers. Their defense could be bad enough to require them to sustain three wide receivers and throw the ball all over the yard. To your point earlier, Pat, he's the cheapest. I think he might be the best one. Might be the second best one. He might be like 1A. He looked really, really good. So between those two guys, just their situations, I think Galladay is the one moving forward that for both season long and even this week, I think he's the better play.
So you have Galladay, you have Enunwa. Devin Funchess is in there, who saw a huge bump last year when Kelvin Benjamin and Greg Olsen both went away, that he was double-digit targets every single week. And then you have a situation where you see Chris Godwin right there, who is highly efficient, played a ton of snaps last week anyway before Deshaun Jackson got hurt. And now I'll say Djax. Hard one for me. I have a thoth tongue, so I can't say Deshaun Jackson all that well. But Djax hurt his shoulder, dealing with a concussion, probably not going to play. So out of those four guys, I think all four of them are quite viable, to tell you the truth, and they're super cheap. We talk about building some of those, maybe not. If you want to use two of those guys, that also saves a bit of salary if you did want to pay up at running back, up at receiver in different spots, and maybe you don't need two of them on your roster. Maybe you just need one of them or potentially something else. But I think that all four of those guys are valuable. So if you had to rank them, you go Galladay over Enunwa. Would you go Galladay over Godwin?
I would go Galladay over Godwin, but I would probably put Funchess at the top of the list on all those guys. And I'm a big opportunity guy, Pat. So like there's plenty of opportunity in Carolina for Devin Funchess because it's going to be Christian McCaffrey, it's going to be Cam Newton, and it's going to be Devin Funchess. Greg Olson's out. The depleted Atlanta defense should open up across the middle for Funchess, where he kind of likes to live a little bit. So $4,700, a lot of opportunity. I don't think Godwin. I think Godwin's okay. I assume they're going to have to throw the ball to beat Philadelphia this week or to even contend in that game. So I think he's a fine play, but there's just going to be a ton of targets in Carolina for Devin Funchess that I can't overlook at week 2. Just give me like all the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that Godwin, as it pertains to week 2, if they really go out of their way to take away Evans, it could open up a lot for Godwin. But that could go to O.J. Howard or Cameron Brate or Hump Daddy, who knows? But even on, like, when we stick in this area, you have Jamison Crowder right there. You have Marquise Goodwin. We can talk about Pierre Garçon just a little bit. Like, Goodwin's banged up. But if he plays, who do you think, like, it looks like Darius Slay is going to play as well. If Goodwin doesn't play, I would assume Slay takes out Pierre Garçon. Would that make Dante Pettis a decent option?
I think you're pretty deep. The problem is, especially even with Godwin, is like, okay, they might take away Mike Evans, but Ryan Fitzpatrick might stink at football. Like, right? Like we might get 5 weeks of him just being unable to complete a pass, which would not be that unreasonable compared to what we've seen in the past. So I think we're banking on a lot of factors to come into play to get those guys to value this week. So I'm very concerned. If I have to go down to Pettis, I'm probably avoiding the situation altogether. I like him as an athletic freak who can do a lot of different things, but I think you're really hard up if you're rostering him.
Yeah, and there's probably better plays in that area anyway. The last one of that sort of mix of the four guys that we talked about, I'll throw Randall Cobb into that too. A lot of people watched him, obviously, on Sunday night. Now he's going up against the Vikings, a team that he's had success against in the past, playing out of the slot. That's the one spot where it did seem like Minnesota was somewhat susceptible last week. So is Randall Cobb an option here for you? Because he's going to be popular. And how does he compare to those other four guys that we talked about? Because I think I might just end up with Enunwa instead if Enunwa's going to be way lower owned.
Yeah, I'm probably more down on Randall Cobb than most of the industry. I do agree. Playing in the slot is a benefit to him. The concerns around Aaron Rodgers are both injury based, but also like, I know they're different rosters, but he has not been great against Minnesota over the last couple of years. I think he's played them 5 times. He's scored over 21 DraftKings points on one occasion. Now it was like a 40-point game, but there's been a lot of bad games, or more bad games than good games. And he might be a little banged up. He might not be able to move within the pocket or roll out in the normal way that we would see Aaron Rodgers. So, it's hard to ever come up with concerns about the guy, but if there are concerns, I think this is the week, and it might trickle down to these wide receivers as well.
Is there anyone below $4,000 you can envision playing? Because for me, I haven't narrowed down to 2 guys, unless I'm missing someone. Mike Williams is my favorite at $3,700 against the Bills. I just think this is a very nice spot for him to really break out in a big way. And like the only other one I can really think of, I mean, Bruce Ellington if Will Fuller doesn't play?
Yeah, I wouldn't kill you for that one. It's pretty bad. Quite honestly, I'm probably going to avoid down here because I can get value at tight end. I can get value at running back. I probably won't pay up for a quarterback as usual. So I assume I'm not going to have to get down into this range. Mike Williams, first round talent. I think that's fine, but I really probably wouldn't touch any of these other guys.
All right, let's go to quarterbacks. At the top, Drew Brees in a very they project to be the second highest scoring team of the week with 29 points. He's the most expensive at $7,200. Then it's Big Ben, who's also up there at 29 points. Rivers, Cam, Brady, Rodgers is up there as well. Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson, Goff, Luck, Mahomes, Stafford, Alex Smith, Garoppolo. That's your $6,000 and up range when it comes to it. Do you have anyone in that range you would play, or are you just going to be like everyone else, say, screw it, I'm shoving in Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, I usually spend down on quarterback. It seems to be the best option week after week when you go back and run the numbers. But if you were forcing me to roster one of these guys up top, I suppose it's Big Ben, right? And we kind of talked about it where excellent Vegas odds. He's back at home, which you get the Big Ben at home boost. But also okay, so this is a theory that I have. I should probably look into this. But when a player in the DraftKings lobby has a questionable or like one of these tags on it that's an injury, their ownership is always too low. Because you get guys coming in, making lineups today, and seeing that, and they're like, well, I'm not going to come back on Sunday and change it if he's not playing, so I'm just not going to touch it. So I don't know if that's a real thing. It's a real thing in my head, but I don't know if it's actually a real thing. So I'd probably target Ben in this top range, but I don't love it.
I would play Ben over any of the top 5 quarterbacks in terms of pricing. He would be my favorite. I would play him over Breeze, and I'll probably run out some Steelers stacks to go along with it. I know that I'm not going to be the only one doing that, but it's like, here's a hammer, let's hit it over the head. That's what this situation is setting up. I'm not too concerned about this elbow problem. That sounds like fake news to me, just as an excuse of why Ben again played bad on the road. Now they're back at home. Things will be hunky-dory for him. When you pay down, like Garoppolo, I think is a nice play. Obviously, Mahomes is a nice play. Alex Smith is in a really good spot as well for his price point. I don't know if I love his upside. So I like those 3 guys, but the one that really kind of jumps out to me as someone no one's going to own is Deshaun Watson.
Okay, so let's talk about Deshaun Watson. I like that because we've seen what he can be, right? Like he can be like QB1. He can be the best fantasy quarterback in the league. He played New England last week when they had the entire offseason to prepare for him, right? I mean, when you face a guy like Bill Belichick who has time to scheme for you, you're in big trouble. That is not going to be the case this week against Tennessee. And you're paying $6,300 for a guy who legit, would you be surprised at all if he ends up as quarterback 1? Probably not. I really like that one, Pat.
Yeah, I think that's the contrarian GPP pivot play to get off of a lot of it because Mahomes is going to be super chalky. I think people will talk themselves into Alex Smith. Garoppolo might be a nice pivot too because I really do like that matchup. But I think that Watson is the one, obviously, with the highest ceiling out of all of them, and just people are scorned after last week. This is how this stuff works. Guy had one bad week, he could never have a good week again. That's how DraftKings works, and that's how people think. If you're going to pay down at the position. Last week, I mean, we gave out Fitzpatrick on the show. Fitzpatrick's the one who hits. Give out Case Keenum. He's pretty good. I would go back to Case Keenum again this week. I think that he's in a really nice spot. And like you said, the industry is kind of down on Royce Freeman. That's more of a situation for me that if he's actually in a split, I just don't see where the upside comes from. But I do like both of the Denver receivers. I think that's an interesting stack if you want to get to it. And I guess the other guy is Tyrod. He produced a good fantasy line last week in a really abysmal game where he completed like 4% of his passes. Against the Saints D, they're going to put up a ton of points. It's on a fast track. He can do it on the ground. He can get one of these receivers open. They can do the work after the catch. I don't think a ton of people are going to be on him. He's only $5,900. What do you think?
Yeah, Tyrod's going to be a problem for me because I'm going to have way too much of him. I'll get to that in a second. I think that if you want to go contrarian real quick, Andrew Luck at $6,200 threw the ball 53 times last week, and they were in control of it for most of the game. I don't know what's he going to do, throw it 60 times if they need to come from behind. And then also, I'll give you a fun fact here, Pat. That Ryan Fitzpatrick call you had or talked about last week, the highest value of any quarterback has produced in the last 4 years, 9 times value. No one else has even come close to that. So that was a pretty worldly game. But you're right. Tyrod had probably the worst real life quarterback game you could have had. I think he was 15 of 40, 180 something yards. I don't know what his number was. It wasn't pretty. Found the way to rush the ball, found the way to get into the end zone. I don't know if it can get worse. And he was still, QB 7 or 8 or something like that, right? A really good fantasy day for 24.5 DraftKings points. So I agree with you. It's a better situation. Even if he does the same thing, we'll take it. But I just don't see how it can get any worse because he was so brutal last week.
$5,100 Sam Darnold, maybe against the Dolphins?
I was actually pretty impressed with him. Yeah. In the second half of it, I don't think you have to, it's one of these situations where he's still going to have a ton of growing pains, right? You saw it on play number 1. He it's like quarterback 101 is like, don't roll out to the right and throw it across the field in the NFL. Like, it's like quarterbacking 101. He does it. He learned from it, but I imagine we're still going to see a lot of growing pains from this kid moving forward. I don't hate it, but I'm not really thrilled about it either. If you're trying to fit a bunch of other pieces in and Sam Darnold is your option down here, plug it in.
Any interest in the below $5,000 quarterbacks? Your Josh Allen's, your Sam Bradford's, Blaine Gabbert, maybe?
No.
Okay, good
Sure.
to know. Tight ends, let's move to them. Gronk is at the top now, $7,000, not the $6,900 we all love him at. He is now $7,000. Ertz and Kelsey obviously priced up as well. Is this a spot where you're paying up for tight end or paying down?
Yeah, so tight end is almost always a dumpster fire every week, and this is actually a pretty good week. Like, I like it. There's a lot of good guys. So I'd be fine with either. I obviously like Gronk. I obviously like Ertz, but there's like sub 4,000 is where I'm going. I'm not sure if you're ready to jump down there.
Yeah,
yet,
let's do it. I think the best value here is Kittle at 38.
It's 100% Kittle. He was 5 for 90 last week.
And dropped a touchdown that would have been like 80 yards.
Yeah, at worst, it would have been like a 60-yard gain if like that other safety from across the field tracks him down. He had another DB beat late in the game in the fourth quarter, and Garoppolo overthrew him by a couple of yards. And then he had one go off his hands. It was a little high on the pass in the end zone. So like this day could have been massive. But what I like to see, Pat, is he routinely beat his coverage. Like whether it was linebackers, whether it was cornerbacks, whether it was like he beat them. He was burning them. He was running really great routes, and Jimmy G was looking towards him. So kind of another situation where if he would have caught that 80-yard touchdown pass, if he would have tacked on another one in the fourth quarter, price would have been probably a lot higher. Sentiment around the industry would have been a lot higher. But people just checking the box score see 5 for 90. Yeah, maybe I move on, but it was better than that. I think there's plenty of room for improvement for George Kittle.
Yeah, I think that at $3,800, he might not be so chalky because we'll get to the guy that's going to be super chalky. That's right in that area. But the other value that I like from down there, only $3,000. I like David Njoku here. I think you can pair him with Tyrod Taylor. You can play him by himself. He's a gigantic savings. I like the market share that I saw. We were all hyped about him in the preseason. Now, apparently, that's gone away. And now he's in a spot where, yeah, Josh Gordon's going to see more targets and take that away probably from him and Landry all at the same time. But Tyrod's he's probably not going to have to throw the ball more than he did against Pittsburgh, getting the extra quarter of play. But they're going to be throwing a ton here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. The only situation I would have to pair him with Tyrod, I think. I'm not sure I'm playing a naked David Njoku or naked Njoku. Wow, that could be my fantasy team name or something. But I don't think I would play him by himself. But yeah, if you start your lineups, Tyrod and David, like imagine the savings, imagine the things that you can do. I think like how many guys are just going to try to back up Jared Cook and try to get that same type of game?
That's the guy. Like I think that he's going to be like 20% owned. And I always rank Jared Cook in the same spot every week. Worst place. What happens with Jared Cook? When you don't play him, he has the game he had Monday night. When everyone's on Jared Cook, what happens, Rick?
Yeah, this is literally the definition of chasing points here. There's going to be a lot of guys on him expecting him to do anything remotely close to what he did last week, and I can't imagine it happening, right? I mean, we've seen it. We have enough of a Jared Cook career to know he's not that guy we saw last week. So, that especially if we can get I like Kittle better, I like Eric Ebron better, I like Jack Doyle better. Like everyone around Jared Cook, I like better.
Listen, it's not to say that Jared Cook can't do this week. It's a nice spot against Denver. They're weak against tight ends. It seemed like they were scheming legitimately towards Jared Cook. He was the only guy who could get open on the Raiders' offense against a weak linebacking core against the Rams, and you'll see the same thing against Denver. It could happen, but if we're going to take the history of Jared Cook and he just underperforms, just zero consistency when it comes to him, especially in terms of targets week to week to week to week, no matter what team that he's on, that if he's going to be 20% owned, that just seems like a very if Jared Cook beats me, Jared Cook beats me. That's fine. I'm not going to win every week anyway, but if that's going to be a stand that I have to make every week, either play chalky Jared Cook or fade him completely, I'm going to fade him completely until he can put together, let's say, 6 really good games in a row, and then I might jump in. And if that's the case, then the 7th week will be the week he has the 0.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I've heard a lot of talk already about like the 2 indie tight ends. So Ebron is the one that actually caught the touchdown last week, but I still think Jack Doyle is the guy you want moving forward. He had 10 targets. He, I think, was only second on the team to T.Y. Hilton. So Doyle priced to move, seeing potentially double-digit targets against Washington is a guy that will eat up a lot of my dollars. So it'll probably be Doyle, Kittle, and then if I have some lineups where I'm paying up for tight end, you know who we got up there.
Well, you have Gronk and Ertz up there. Is there the potential that Ertz might be a better play this week going against Tampa than Gronk would be against the Jags?
If Carson Wentz was playing, I would think yes. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they haven't been great with Nick Foles. I don't know if it's they don't have a connection, if it's a small sample size. I love Zach Ertz as a player, but I would obviously love it more if Carson Wentz was playing. So I think it's really, really close, but I for $900 more, I'm going to get the known entity in Rob Gronkowski, who when he plays is unbelievable. Like he's averaging 25 DraftKings points over the course of like the last 8 starts, something like that. I mean, he's just really, really unbelievable. We expect it out of him, so it's never really newsworthy when he does it, but he's really good, Pat.
What about Kelce as a part of this Kansas City game stack with Pittsburgh that everyone's going to play? Do you think that because he underperformed last week that he might be the piece that people don't pay for?
Yeah, for sure. And especially because if there's anything that drives ownership in the NFL, again, in my mind, it's the injury designations and it's this silly little, rank against the defense that we're playing. Well, we're one game in here, so don't take those too seriously. And it's got that little red mark that says Pittsburgh's the ninth best defense against tight end. It's like, okay, cool. You can kind of throw that out. I think he's going to be very under-owned because we talked about the value options. We got the 2 guys that we like at the top. Kelce seems like the odd man out. And again, I'm probably only pairing him with Mahomes. There's a lot of tight ends I wouldn't need to do that with. But I like getting double dipping on points there in that game with, Vegas expecting it to be so highly scored.
I guess the other guys I did just want to briefly mention, I'm with you. I like Kittle the best. Doyle is right there as well. Fading Cook. I'll play Njoku. Ryan Griffin had 3 red zone targets last week, and he could have had 3 touchdowns against the Patriots, and it didn't work out for him. So he ended up with a big goose egg in terms of fantasy points. He's not someone who's going to generate like 14 targets a game. But if you play Deshaun Watson, do you just play a stack, play Watson, Hopkins, and play Griffin along with him?
So it's interesting because if you do that, you at least get the cheap option of Griffin. I don't think I'll have to get there. I mean, 0 for 5 on targets last week. I know there were red zone targets, but you got to catch the ball at some point to rack up the points. I don't think you need to go that low. I think there's much better options. But if you were really buying into Houston, I like doing a 3-player stack, especially with one that you can get as cheap as Ryan Griffin, because you're not going to get many opportunities across the league to be able to do that. I just don't think it's necessary, but go win the Millie Maker with it.
Yeah, it depends on if Will Fuller plays or not as well. You have to mix that into it. The other 2 guys replacing starting tight ends, Walker went down, Olsen went down, Ian Thomas is $2,900, and then Johnny Smith is $3,100. If Mariota starts and it's not Gabbard, or even if it is Gabbard, do you have interest in any one of those 2 guys? Because we talked about opportunity with Funches. Maybe Thomas works his way into the mix?
Yeah, it's possible. I'm going to need to see it a little bit first, at least some glimpses of it. It's one of these situations where it's kind of like basketball. Someone goes down and their backup comes in and you're like, oh, they're just, a lot of guys, they're going to take over the whole role. Like, this is going to be Greg Olsen. This is going to be great. Doesn't really work like that. Opportunity gets spread out across the other guys. I think the bigger beneficiaries are the wide receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks of those teams, as opposed to just plugging and playing in your number 2 tight end on the depth chart. So I'll at least want to see some glimpses. If there's at least some targets, some athleticism, some, something to hang our hats on. Definitely going to consider it for week 3, but there's too many other good options for me to get there today.
Last one, $5,000 Jordan Reed. Is that too expensive or too cheap?
Oh, man, Pat. I think it's probably too cheap. Because, okay, so here's the thing with Jordan Reed is in season long, it stinks because he's always hurt. But in daily, we know he's quote unquote healthy going into this game, right? And he caught a touchdown last week. So when he's healthy and he plays, he has great upside. We know what he can do. Now, if he gets hurt in the second quarter and comes out, we don't play him again, whatever, that's fine. But as long as he's healthy, as long as he's suiting up, I think he's too cheap because he is a very athletic, big body tight end who has shown great prowess and great upside in the past. So season long wouldn't touch the guy. DFS, he's probably too cheap.
Let's move to defenses. You got any hot takes on defenses as must plays here? Because there's a few nice options you can pay up for if you really want. You can pay up for the Chargers, pay up for the Rams, the Broncos at home against Oakland. That sounds pretty good. Is there anyone that really sticks out to you as a favorite?
Yeah, I am so bad at trying to figure out defenses. And because it's, there's so much that we need, like the pick six, we need some fumbles. A lot of it's pretty random. So I like to lean on guys that can get to the quarterback, right? Sacks, rack up points, hurries, can force interceptions. They can, getting to the quarterback can force fumbles. So give me guys with good rushers. The Rams, obviously the chalk, but like I want to give you some more reason on why, as opposed to just plugging them in at $3,700. Like I like the aspects of that defense compared to other defenses here. Like there was a time I thought the Saints defense was pretty good, and then Ryan Fitzpatrick showed up. So I think you'll be fine with the Rams, and I also do like targeting like against rookie quarterbacks. So even Sam Darnold looked pretty good at times last week, but like these guys tend to turn the ball over more, or a lot more than their veteran counterparts. The numbers bear that out. So the things that I usually target are pass rushers and then rookie quarterbacks if I can find them.
I think that going back to the Saints might not be the worst idea here because everyone's going to be off them because everyone used them last week. They scored like -9 DraftKings points. And I think that the Saints defense can score fantasy points and Tyrod can succeed at the same time. But he took an awful lot of sacks last week against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he certainly did. And I agree with you. Like talking about week one and what happened and trying not to overreact, like the Saints might be bad, but they're probably not nearly as bad as what they showed last week. So I agree. Buying low on a lot of these guys or a lot of these defenses is going to be an option. And then, yeah, even Dallas, I feel like, so I don't, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but like, Eli Manning's another one of these guys who anytime you get within 5 feet of him, he just kind of crumples down and takes the sack, right? Guys that do that to preserve themselves are great guys to target on the defensive side of the ball. So those are the types of things that I'm looking for. But quite honestly, Pat, I mean, when do you throw a defense into your lineups? Do you start with it? Do you end with it? Like, what do you do with it?
I really like to target one from each level, so like an expensive one, a around $3,000 one, and a really cheap one. And then when I get to the end of my lineups, I see which one corresponds the best with that lineup. How much do I have left? Now, there are some times, like I'm going to play the Skins defense this week. I think that Washington is in a really nice spot. Home favorites against Andrew Luck. You talked about the amount of times that he passes. All I'm really looking for as it pertains to defenses is what opportunity they're going to get to score. Now, their pass rush is good, not great, but if Andrew Luck's going to throw the ball 50 times, that's 50 opportunities for them to generate sacks, to generate turnovers. And I mean, just getting pressure on the quarterback, make a mistake or two, and then boom, you're in the money when it comes to this. And they're only $2,700. So that would be like my either middle to low tier guys, because there's not like a punt defense that I really seem to like. The Texans are right there. They might be playing Blaine Gabbert, and they're $2,600. Like, that sounds pretty good. But if I played, let's say, if I was playing a Kamara lineup, or if I was playing a Gurley lineup, sometimes I would like to play a running back along with the defense, hope there's a turnover, generate a short field, and just kind of correlate everything together. That's definitely not necessary. But I just like to pick and choose a few defenses, and that's who I'm rolling with for the week. I don't like to get too fancy with it.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the last decisions that I make. I have a few targets each week, but a lot of it's pretty random. And I agree, there is no punt defense this week, so you'll see me focus my attention at the Rams. I agree. I think the Saints are a pretty good bounce back, and then even Miami, who let's see if Sam Darnold really is Joe Montana or something like that. We'll find out.
All right, let's talk stacks. Best stacks of the week. Now, per the numbers, like we keep talking about, the highest team totals of the week, the Rams, the Steelers, and the Saints, all projected around 29 points. Do you like those stacks independent of the other side of the ball? Are there like complete game stacks that you like? And which one do you think is going to be the lower owned stack for people to go with? Because I think that the Chargers stack might be something that people stay away from.
I tend to agree about the Chargers, just because there's what the industry will think as better options, right? But the way that I kind of like to do my stacks are a little bit different than just quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end. I've been getting more into the situations where they're few and far between, the situations you can get a quarterback, running back, or a 3-player stack. So a Tom Brady, Rex Burkhead, Chris Hogan, something like that, where you're getting multiple, you're just buying into the entire offense. So with that being said, when we were talking about stacks, one of my favorites is Goff and Gurley, right? You mentioned it for a second earlier, but those guys in theory are going to eat up the entire offense for LA, and they have the highest implied Vegas total according to the odds that I have in front of me. They have no real number one wide receiver that you would expect to catch, 2 touchdowns or eat up a lot of that. So I feel like you can get some opportunities being a little bit against the grain with a quarterback, running back, or stacking an entire team that I'll probably start with LA and then probably work my way down into let's see here. Like I don't mind the Chargers. I think the Kansas City offense is, they're on the opposite side of that Pittsburgh game. There's probably going to be plenty of points there. So I think there's a lot of options. It just kind of depends on your risk aversion and how deep you want to take this.
Yeah, I think that overall game stack, Cleveland, New Orleans, and Pittsburgh, Kansas City are probably better as a full game stack than LA and the Cardinals are, just because you don't really know who to trust from the Cardinals side of the ball. The problem with the Pittsburgh KC stack is that everyone's expensive.
Yeah, so if you continue to go down the list, I'm wondering if you could look at even San Francisco, Detroit. That's like the 4th highest total on the slate, like 47.5. There's only I think it's only 2 or 3 games that are higher than that. So you could get someone like Jimmy G, George Kittle, maybe Galladay. You could put some pieces together and then fill it in with some really expensive guys because you haven't spent anything to stack like the 3rd or 4th highest game on the slate.
I guess the final 2 that I would say, the 2 contrarian stacks, I think I like the most. I talked about that Houston one. Even if it's just Hopkins and it's just Watson, if Fuller plays, you would throw him in, potentially Ryan Griffin. I think that's an offense that's just no one's looking at for this week because they underperformed last week. And I think it has a very high ceiling. A lot of downside that could come along with it, but a very high ceiling as well. And the other one is just Denver. Just play Keenum, play Demarius, and play Emmanuel Sanders, and that's like all the market share on the team.
Yeah, that's fine. I think one that's similar, it'll be more expensive, is play Newton, McCaffrey, and Devin Funchess. Like, I don't know who else is going to possibly score on that team, but I do like the Denver one, and it avoids you having to choose between Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas because I know I can never get them right.
If you had to pick one, would you just go with the value of DT? Because I actually do think objectively that Sanders is a better play. I have him projected to score more points, but it's not substantially more. And if you get the $700 discount, that kind of negates everything anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. In a vacuum, I think Sanders is a better player. But DT, the discount, whether it's a drop in ownership, I don't know what their ownerships are going to be. But yeah, I agree with you. It's an opportunity. We're splitting hairs. So if you can get the guy who's cheaper and the $700 you pay less for DT is worth it when you go to construct these rosters. I agree.
Rick Gehman, check him out on Twitter at DFS On Demand and on the Rick Run Good YouTube channel. What do you got coming up this week?
Yeah, man. So luckily, we usually talk for PGA. Luckily, we've got a week off. I'm going to try to just knock out some NFL content. Been building out the tools. So, there's been requests for doing something about survivor pools and doing some more positional breakdowns and some more research process. So we'll see. It'll all be available on, Rick Run Good on YouTube. You can search DFS On Demand if you want to listen to a podcast. It's in iTunes and Spotify and wherever else you get your pods. But yeah, I'll be around.
All right. Thanks for being on the show, dude.
I really appreciate it.
Good luck this week. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the PME. Hit the description or go to dkplaybook.com for all the rankings and cheat sheets and so forth. Subscribe to the video version and audio version wherever you can. We got shows coming out every single day, plus live, like I said, Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Myself, Gary and Thornton, Tim Undercust. We'll be breaking all down, all the inactives, all the latest injuries, updating the rankings, and taking your questions. 9:30 a.m. Mondays, too, with Jake Seeley for the waiver wire. If you want to get in a draw for $20 DK, give the episode a like. Go to the comment section. Leave your DraftKings handle and then your single favorite value for the Sunday Millionaire Maker slate. All right? I'm Pat Mayo. Good luck in week 2. Someone go win $1 million, all right? I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!